So once again, good afternoon, everyone. And then let this period or let this session be a continuation of the discussion that we had this morning regarding different structures in using different structures in noun possessions. This morning's discussion ended with the presentation of an infinitive and the infinitive phrase. What we weren't able to accomplish this morning was the use of an infinitive or an infinitive phrase in the five functions that we could attribute to nouns or verbals. Verbals that function as nouns. So let's have an infinitive first. Let's decide that our infinitive be infinitive. I think we can just have an infinitive phrase instead. Infinitive phrase is to read novels. Let that be our infinitive phrase, to read novels. The infinitive in this phrase is to read. It is said earlier, it was said this morning, it was shown in the chat box this morning that when we make an infinitive phrase, it is a combination of the infinitive and its modifier. If not the modifier, its receiver. In this infinitive phrase, what we have is a receiver of the act of reading. We have an object. To read what? The answer is novels. So we have a complete infinitive phrase with an infinitive and its receiver. First is we shall make use of it as a subject. So to read novels is quite interesting. That's our sentence. To read novels is quite interesting. In that sentence, there is no other thing being talked about but the idea of reading novels or the act which is to read novels. Thereby, an infinitive phrase which functions as a subject. Why did I mention that the sentence didn't talk of anything else but this infinitive phrase? Because that's what a subject is. A subject is being talked about in a sentence. Let's go to the next function, a direct object. Once again, if we have a direct object in a sentence, it could answer the question what, or who, or whom. But since we are dealing with verbals, we shall put aside the who and the whom. We will focus on the word or the question word what. So we can have a sentence that goes, I love what? To read novels. No matter how long the sentence is, if you just go and examine its parts in terms of those significant components, you'll know that there is actually a direct object. For instance, I'll make a longer sentence still with the same direct object. During summer, I love to read novels. What I did in this other sentence now is to expand the original sentence by adding a prepositional phrase which functions as an adverb. So again, it's not the length of the sentence that determines what the function is of its elements. You really have to examine the sentences in or the sentence in terms of what makes it up, which in this case could be directed to the direct object. Again, we go with I love what? What do I love as found in the sentence? The answer is to read novels. Therefore, the infinitive phrase serves as an answer to the question what, and the answer to the question what is what we refer to as the direct object. Let us go with the object of the preposition. Once again, we are reminded that an object of the preposition is found inside a prepositional phrase. But be reminded as well that the infinitive phrase begins with a preposition too. But it doesn't mean that we cannot make the infinitive or the infinitive phrase an object of the preposition. For example, our sentence is, wait, wait. I try to look for one in the example. Wait, sorry. Wait, ha. Wait. This is quite a challenge. Uh, I'll make a simpler example. They are about to read novels. Like, what are they about to do? They're about to read novels now. They're about to read novels. What word is placed before to read novels? It's the word about. About belongs to what part of speech? About is a preposition. And so our prepositional phrase is about to read novels. In that prepositional phrase, our preposition is about, and the object of the preposition is to read novels. By the way, please do not be surprised that my label is direct object and then I gave a sentence. That label is to tell you that that sentence contains a direct object. That sentence contains an object of the preposition. Not that the sentence itself is really the direct object. The idea there is the sentence contains a direct object. It's in that direct object category or function. Let's have another function, and this time as a complement. I just do it this way. A complement. A complement, once again, is a word or an expression that refers back to the subject. And in fact, at some point, we could interchange the positions of the two and we would not distort the meaning of the two sentences. They would still mean the same way. For example, there. My favorite pastime during summer is to read novels. In that sentence, our subject is pastime. And what is the pastime? What does this sentence say of what my favorite pastime is? The answer is to read novels. In fact, you could interchange the positions of the two and you will arrive at a rewritten form that says to read novels is my favorite pastime during summer. And so, in the original sentence, to read novels functions as a complement. You can call it a subjective complement. You can call it a predicate nominative. At any rate, what it does is to refer back to the subject. That referred back action or purpose of the complement is what allows us to interchange the positions of the two. Let's compare the original sentence and the rewritten sentence. Is there a difference in meaning? There's none. The original sentence tells us that there's a pastime during summer, and that pastime is to read novels. In the rewritten form, it tells us that to read novels is the favorite pastime that the person has during summer. The meaning remains the same. And so we have a complement. And lastly, this infinitive or infinitive phrase can function as an appositive. What do appositives do? They provide additional information. They provide as a form of specification of what that noun wants to provide, wants to say. like this. Sorry. My hobby to read novels has been noted well by my classmates. There's a word that you could find before the infinitive phrase, and it's that word hobby. If you take out the infinitive phrase to read novels, you'll be left with a sentence that says, "My hobby has been noted well by my classmates." The inclusion of the infinitive phrase gives more details or an additional information of what that hobby is that was noted or has been noted by that classmate or by the classmates of this person. And so, what's the answer of what that hobby is? The hobby is to read novels, which makes it the appositive. Questions regarding verbals made to function as nouns. Any question? If there's none, we proceed with the last possible structure that could take on the function of a noun. We are then referring to clauses. This has been a repeated question. I've raised this several times. What are the requirements for a clause to be called a clause? There are only three requirements. First requirement, I'll just type it in like what I did in another class, has, sorry, has to be a group of words. That's the first requirement. That group of words must contain a subject and a predicate. Lastly, that group of words must contain a thought which is either complete or incomplete. Again, three requirements for a clause to be called a clause. It has to be a group of words, and that group of words contains a subject and a predicate. By the way, a predicate, by simple definition, is a verb. That's the simplest definition that you could associate to a predicate, a verb. And lastly, that group of words with a subject and a predicate must contain a thought, which is either complete or incomplete. If the thought is complete, the clause is independent. If the thought is incomplete, the clause is dependent. An independent clause can also be called a main clause. A dependent clause can also be called a subordinate clause. What kind of clause can function as a noun? We are referring to dependent clauses. These clauses can function as nouns or modifiers. But for this discussion, we focus for the meantime on dependent clauses and as nouns. And so we call them noun clauses. As a dependent clause, a noun clause starts with a coordinating conjunction. Because it's a dependent clause. Dependent clauses begin with subordinating conjunctions, which means that noun clauses also begin in that same category of conjunctions. So at this point, you put aside your fanboys. You put aside your conjunctive adverbs because these words are not subordinating. They are coordinating conjunctions instead. So you put them aside. Talking of subordinating conjunctions that we use for noun clauses, we can go with your WHs and the how. They are the commonly used subordinating conjunctions made to begin or start your noun clauses. Even whether can be used to begin a noun clause. And in the same way, as a noun clause, that clause takes on the six functions of a noun. For example, let's start with a noun clause that functions as a subject. Go with examples now. A noun clause that functions as a subject. Let's start with this. So as the subject, it's the one being talked about. And so what we have is this sentence. This. What we want for Christmas remains to be a mystery. What is our subject in this sentence? Wait, I'll try to expand the label. Subject of the sentence. It's the noun clause. What we want for Christmas. Why did I have a better label as subject of the sentence? Because this noun clause also has a subject inside it. What's the subject inside the noun clause? It's the word we. What's the verb of the sentence? The verb of the sentence is remains. What's the verb inside the noun clause? It's the word want. That's why we have to be very clear with our labels. Every clause is expected to have a subject and a verb. And since we are incorporating or putting them inside sentences to make them function as nouns, we need to be clear with our label, because if we simply say, what is the subject here in this example, we might be referring to the subject of the entire sentence or to the subject inside that noun clause. That's why I have to be really complete with my labels. Question so far with the noun clause acting as a subject. And be reminded, as a subject, it's the one being talked about in the sentence. Questions? As an additional information, aside from your WHs and the how, the word that can signal the can. I didn't say it's not absolute all the time, because that may be a demonstrative pronoun. It may also be a conjunction, a subordinating conjunction. It depends on what else comes after it. In fact, as a subordinating conjunction, it could be used to start a noun clause or an adjective clause. That is why we have to be very careful with the use of that. So as an additional information, aside from your WHs and the how, the conjunction that may or can signal the presence of a noun clause. Let's go with another function, that of a derivative. Let's put a line. The other function is that of a direct object. Here I'll use the word that to show to you what it does as it opens a noun clause. There. She said that we are not ready. She said what? See the question? She said what? There is an answer to the question what. And like we've had in the discussion this morning, the answer to that question what is what we shall consider as the direct object. In this sentence, what is the answer to the question what? It's the noun clause that we are ready. Therefore, our direct object is that we are not ready. What is the subject of the sentence? It's the word she. What is the verb of the sentence? Verb of the sentence. The word said. What is the subject of the noun clause? It's the word we. Sorry for the spelling of the word subject. It's embarrassing. What is the verb of the noun clause? The verb of the noun clause is are. Those are the components of the sentence and of the noun clause. to really set the difference between them. Also, please consider that if you remove that in the sentence sounds fine. She said, "We are not ready." But I tell you, in the rules of grammar, in the conventions of standard English that they follow, the conjunction that should really appear. Well, at least if it's not there, if you read from books that supposedly a conjunction that should be placed, yet it was omitted, at least you should know that strictly speaking, the word that should actually be placed in that part of the sentence. Let's have another sentence for the direct object. Sorry. We want to know why no one answered the call. There are actually two receivers here, two direct objects. The first direct object is in the form of an infinitive phrase. What is that direct object? We want what? To know why no one answered the call. So I'll try to note that down. Let's try to examine the sentence in its components. What is the subject of the sentence? It's the word we. The verb of the sentence. The verb of the sentence is the word want. What is the direct object of the sentence? The direct object of the sentence is the infinitive phrase to know why no one answered the call. This chat box is not capable of autocorrection unlike Zoom. That's the direct object of the sentence. But let's examine the infinitive phrase. So our direct object is the infinitive phrase to know why no one answered the call. In this infinitive phrase, we can actually look for an answer what? To know what? In this infinitive phrase, there is a receiver inside the infinitive phrase. And that receiver is the noun clause, why no one answered the call. This receiver answered the question what? And so it is also our direct object inside the infinitive phrase. What's the subject in this direct object inside the infinitive phrase? One. No is a modifier to one. The verb is answered. See? As a direct object. Questions? Time is already 4:59. How's everyone? Should we continue this now or continue this on Thursday? So that at least we don't have much to work on the continuation. We can spend more of the time for the discussions. At least we're already on noun clauses. So, are we fine if we continue the discussion on Thursday instead? With noun clauses, indirect object to the object of the preposition. Okay. If that's the case, reserve your questions then. I look forward to hearing your questions on Thursday. And then that will be all for today. Goodbye and thank you.